From military officer to all-powerful dictator, uncover the fascinating story of how Mobutu conquered Congo and shaped its troubled history. The Democratic Republic of Congo has a long and complex history, marked by colonization, exploitation, and civil war. One of the most notorious figures in Congolese history is Mobutu Sese Seko, the former president of Zaire. He ruled the country with an iron fist for more than 3 decades, from 1965 until he was overthrown in 1997. Mobutu's regime was characterized by corruption, repression, and a cult of personality that centered on his own image and authority. However, his rise to power was not without its own complexities, as Mobutu initially came to prominence as a military officer who sought to unite the fractured country after it gained independence from Belgium in 1960. In this video, we'll explore the complex story of how Mobutu conquered Congo and the lasting impact of his rule on the country and its people. Part 1. From military officer to president. Mobutu's rise to power in Congo began in the early 1960s, during a turbulent period of the country's history. Following Congo's independence from Belgium in 1960, political instability and conflict erupted between various factions, including rival political parties, ethnic groups, and regions. During this time, Mobutu rose through the ranks of the Congolese army, becoming one of the country's most powerful military officers. In 1960, the charismatic Congolese leader, Patrice Lumumba, was elected as the country's first prime minister. Lumumba was a charismatic figure who called for national unity and independence from foreign powers, but his time in office was marked by political turmoil and conflict. He faced opposition from many quarters, including the country's colonial powers, who feared that Lumumba would align Congo with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. In 1961, Lumumba was overthrown in a military coup and later assassinated. Mobutu, who had previously been a close ally of Lumumba, then aligned himself with Joseph Desire, the president of Congo, and became the head of the country's intelligence agency. In 1965, Mobutu seized power in a military coup, ousting Kasavubu and establishing himself as the new president of Congo. Mobutu quickly consolidated his power by disbanding political parties and arresting his opponents. He also changed the name of the country to Zaire and declared himself Mobutu Sese Seko Kuku Ngbendu wa Zabanga, which translates to the all-powerful warrior who goes from conquest to conquest, leaving fire in his wake. Mobutu's rise to power was characterized by a mixture of opportunism, political cunning, and military force. He was able to position himself as a key power broker in the chaotic and divided politics of post-independence Congo. His rise to power was also aided by the support of foreign powers, including the United States and France, who saw him as a bulwark against the spread of communism in Africa. Once in power, Mobutu began to consolidate his control over the country's political, economic, and social institutions. He disbanded all political parties and established the Popular Movement of the Revolution, MPR, a one-party state that was designed to give him absolute control over the country. He also established a cult of personality around himself, portraying himself as a benevolent father figure to the Congolese people. Despite his promises of stability and prosperity, Mobutu's rule was marked by corruption, economic stagnation, and political repression. His regime was notorious for its human rights abuses, including torture, extrajudicial killings, and forced disappearances. He also neglected the country's infrastructure and basic services, leading to a decline in living standards for many Congolese. Part 2. The Cult of Personality. One of the defining features of Mobutu's rule in Congo was his cult of personality. From the beginning of his time in power, Mobutu portrayed himself as a larger-than-life figure who embodied the ideals of strength, discipline, and unity. He used a variety of methods to promote his image, including propaganda, public events, and the creation of national symbols. One of the key ways that Mobutu promoted his cult of personality was through the use of propaganda. His regime controlled all media outlets in the country including newspapers, radio, and television, and used them to promote his image and ideology. The state-run newspaper, Zaire News, was filled with stories and images of Mobutu portraying him as a visionary leader who was dedicated to the welfare of his people. The regime also used public events, such as rallies and parades, to promote his image and celebrate his achievements. Another way that Mobutu promoted his cult of personality was through the creation of national symbols that embodied his vision of a unified and powerful Congo. He changed the name of the country to Zaire, a name that he believed reflected the country's African identity and history. He also introduced a new flag featuring a stylized leopard's head, which he saw as a symbol of the country's strength and courage. Mobutu also introduced a new national anthem and created a new calendar system based on the African tradition of dividing the year into 13 months. Mobutu's cult of personality also extended to his personal life, which was marked by extravagance and opulence. He built lavish palaces for himself, including the famous Gebedelite Palace, which was said to be the largest private residence in the world. He also surrounded himself with a coterie of loyal followers who were known as the Mobutuists and who were given positions of power and influence in the regime. Part 3. Corruption and Decay. While Mobutu's cult of personality provided a veneer of stability and strength, the reality of his regime was one of corruption and decay. Under his rule, Congo became one of the most corrupt countries in the world, with widespread embezzlement, nepotism, and bribery. One of the key ways that Mobutu maintained his grip on power was through the use of patronage networks. He surrounded himself with a loyal coterie of followers who were given positions of power and influence in the regime. These loyalists were known as the Mobutuists, and they were given free rein to use their positions for personal gain. They engaged in embezzlement, bribery, and other forms of corruption, using state resources to enrich themselves and their families. Another way that Mobutu maintained his power was through the suppression of dissent. He used the security forces to crush any opposition to his rule, whether it came from political parties, civil society groups, or individual activists. The regime was notorious for its human rights abuses, including torture, extrajudicial killings, and forced disappearances. As a result of Mobutu's corruption and repression, the country's economy and infrastructure were neglected. The state-run companies, which controlled key sectors such as mining and transportation, were poorly managed and riddled with corruption. The country's roads, hospitals, and schools were in disrepair, and basic services such as electricity and clean water were unavailable to many people. Despite the decay and neglect of the country, Mobutu continued to portray himself as a benevolent leader who was dedicated to the welfare of his people. He used propaganda to present himself as a visionary statesman who was leading the country towards a bright future. However, the reality was far different, and the gap between the image of Mobutu and the reality of his regime continued to widen. In the 1990s, the country was hit by a series of crises that exposed the fragility of Mobutu's rule. A combination of economic collapse, civil unrest, and foreign pressure led to the emergence of opposition movements which challenged the regime's legitimacy. The most prominent of these was the Alliance of Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Congo, ADFL, which was led by Laurent Desire Kabila. In 1997, the ADFL launched a military campaign against Mobutu's regime, which culminated in his overthrow and the establishment of a new government led by Kabila. Mobutu fled the country and died in exile in Morocco in 1997. Part 4. The Legacy of Mobutu. The legacy of Mobutu's rule in Congo is complex and multifaceted. On the one hand, he left behind a country that was deeply scarred by corruption, repression, and decay. The country's infrastructure and institutions were neglected, and its economy was crippled by mismanagement and embezzlement. On the other hand, Mobutu's rule also left behind a powerful legacy of political culture and identity. During his time in power, he actively promoted a sense of national identity and pride based on the idea of a Zairian identity that transcended regional and ethnic differences. This sense of national identity helped to unify the country, despite the many challenges it faced under his rule. One of the most enduring legacies of Mobutu's rule is the way that it shaped the country's political landscape. The regime's use of patronage networks and repression helped to create a political culture that was focused on personal loyalty and the pursuit of power. This culture has continued to shape Congolese politics even after the end of Mobutu's rule. Another legacy of Mobutu's rule is the way that it shaped international perceptions of Congo. During his time in power, Mobutu actively promoted the image of Congo as a strong and stable country, despite the many challenges that it faced. This image helped to attract foreign investment and support, but it also masked the reality of the country's decay and corruption. The legacy of Mobutu's rule also continues to shape the country's relationship with its former colonial power, Belgium. During his time in power, Mobutu promoted an ideology of authenticity, which rejected the influence of Western culture and values. This ideology helped to foster a sense of national pride, but it also led to a rupture in the country's relationship with Belgium, which was seen as a symbol of colonialism and Western influence. In the years since the end of Mobutu's rule, Congo has continued to struggle with the legacy of his regime. The country has undergone significant political and economic changes, but it has also faced new challenges, including ongoing conflict and political instability. Despite these challenges, there have been some positive developments in the post-Mobutu era. The country has held several successful democratic elections, and there has been some progress in rebuilding the country's infrastructure and institutions. However, many of the problems that were created under Mobutu's rule continue to persist. Corruption remains a major problem in the country, and the government continues to struggle to provide basic services to its citizens. In addition, the country continues to face ongoing conflict and insecurity, particularly in the eastern regions. In conclusion, the legacy of Mobutu's rule in Congo is complex and multifaceted. While he left behind a country that was deeply scarred by corruption and decay, he also left behind a powerful legacy of political culture and identity. The country has struggled to overcome the problems that were created under his rule, but there have also been some positive developments in the post-Mobutu era. The legacy of his regime continues to shape the politics and society of Congo and will likely continue to do so for many years to come. Well, that's it for today's video. The story of Mobutu's conquest of Congo is a complex and difficult one filled with tragedy and corruption. As we have seen, his legacy continues to shape the DRC today as the country struggles with poverty, conflict, and political instability. However, by exploring this history, we can gain a deeper understanding of the challenges facing the DRC and the way in which its people are working to build a brighter future. If you found this documentary informative and thought-provoking, we encourage you to like and subscribe to our channel for more content on the history and politics of Africa. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.